All right, everybody, we've finally got the line loaded up. Paul, can you say something to listeners? Say hi.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay,
nice to hear
cool.
from you.
All right, thank you, Paul, for dealing with a phone mess right there, but finally got you loaded on the air, and we'll have you here for about another 40 minutes or so. And all right, just to recap for all the listeners out there, our special guest today here on Unstacking the Deck with DJ Strictly Revolutionary is Paul Zarembka, and Paul is an economics professor in the State University of New York system at the Buffalo campus, and I am having him on the show today to speak about his work as editor of a political economy journal series. And one in particular that he contributed some work to was based on insider stock trading on 9/11, or at least this is his contribution to the journal. But the entire thing is a culmination of a lot of disinformation from the government, things that don't mesh with reality and that couldn't possibly have happened. So, Paul, can you maybe break down a little bit, like, what your educational background is and how you came to start studying this, the insider trading and whatnot on 9/11?
Yeah, I was a undergraduate at Purdue University and a graduate student at the University of Wisconsin at Madison, and then I went to Berkeley and then came to Buffalo about 30 years ago. And it's hard to say how I got involved in 9/11 exactly. I know that I heard a lecture by Michael Rupert in Toronto in January or February of 2002, which convinced me that I really had to understand what happened on 9/11. But I don't really remember why I went to that lecture, because it was actually 2 hours away from me. So I guess I was probably pretty interested even before that. So it's been quite a while.
And so that was kind of your first foothold into maybe what most people call the 9/11 truth movement and the pursuit of what really happened.
That's correct.
And where'd that lead you after that?
So for a while I was just doing my own research on it. And then there was a bunch of faculty members who were communicating with each other, and somebody suggested writing a book, or contributing together on a book. And make a long story short, that's the end result was the book you're talking about, The Hidden History of 9/11, which just came out in paperback after being in hardback in the first edition. Second edition is in paperback from 7 Stories Press.
And originally it was like $200 political economy journal.
No, it was $100.
Yeah, it was hard covered and whatnot.
Right.
Yeah,
but now it's only like $15.
Yeah, so you got it luckily on paperback, and that can be found on Amazon.com, correct?
Right.
All right, so yeah, all listeners out there, hopefully after you hear what this man has to say, you may go and spend $15 wisely and learn a whole ton. You actually, inside the book, I saw song lyrics too. You familiar with that section? You had this, there's a hip-hop artist that's part of the content in there. His name's Immortal Technique.
That might have been one of them. That isn't one I'm very familiar with, though.
Yeah, I don't have the book in front of me, so I can't remember which contributor in the journal brought it up. But it says you think that they wouldn't take out 2 buildings to start a war and tell lies to your children or something like that, and something about Dick Cheney and Bush. Without 9/11, they wouldn't have a war in Iraq and all this kind of stuff. And are you familiar maybe with some other artists, just considering that we're on a radio show, that talk about this? I know there's a woman, Annie DeFranco. You might have heard of her. I'm not sure.
Annie DeFranco is actually from Buffalo, New York.
Oh, she is. So you definitely know about her then.
Yes, and in fact, she still has a house here. She's refurbished a church here for her musical. Converted it to a church for her musical productions here. She's really quite a good citizen of this city.
Mm-hmm. So, have you met her before personally then?
Actually, I haven't met her, no.
No. She has a song, I think it's like Smoke and Mirrors or something about smoke. I can't remember. Memory's kind of shot right now after getting that phone line up. But, yeah, can you tell some of the listeners now about what indicated that there was foreknowledge of the September 11 event on that day within the market? What were the telltale clues? And I guess there are put options and some other types of stock activity.
Right. Well, of course, it wasn't that day. It was. You have to look at days before 9/11.
Leading up to it.
And yeah, that's right. And there was a lot of press coverage for about 1 month after 9/11, pointing out that there was the activity that I'm going to describe. I think people who were making the point about it were thinking that it was going to lead, that all we have to do is figure out who did those put options, and we would know that Osama bin Laden did it. But then suddenly all the discussion just died out. And I think what happened was somebody got the word out that it is not going to lead to Osama bin Laden, and so they stopped making any noise about it. But the numbers are still there. I mean, the evidence, the empirical evidence is still there. The empirical evidence, I mean, it's not so easy to get, but it is public knowledge. It's public in the sense that anybody who has enough money can buy it. Usually what that really means is universities who have substantial business schools can buy the data on all put option trades for every day of the year for any put option. And,
can you describe what a put option is?
Okay, so a put option is if you think that a particular company is going, I'm going to give an example of the company going downhill. If you think it's going to have a major hit sometime in the future, then you buy a put option in order to be able to sell that stock like 30 days from now, 60 days from now, even up to 2 years from now. It's a specific length of time, but you can do it any time during that length of time. Sell that stock at a specific price, which is called the strike price. So, for example, a strike price of $30 would mean that during the period of the contract, you could sell that stock at $30 to the person who made the contract with you. And I mentioned $30 because American Airlines and United Airlines were both selling at stocks was both selling about $30 a share before 9/11. So there was a lot of activity on selling put options on United Airlines and American Airlines for particularly October and November 2001. And that happened just in a few days before 9/11 itself.
And,
so what happens then, so let me just finish.
Okay.
So then what happens is that the stock price, in fact, went down to $17. So all you have to do then is buy the stock at $17, and then you have the right to sell it at $30. So you make a nice profit.
Wow.
$13 a share, except for the cost. There's some cost involved, but that's basically what you're trying to do.
And didn't you mention something about the person that bought up all the stock, that their name wasn't publicly disclosed or something? I remember talking about that over lunch one day.
Yes. Well, that's the 9/11 Commission report, because it had been in the financial press that there was a lot of put option trades. The financial press pointed it out, and the 9/11 Commission report felt that they had to do something. So they wrote one sentence and one rather long footnote dismissing the whole issue of this quote, unusual trading is what they called it. But they thought it was unusual but not significant. And what they pointed out to, for example, is that they claimed there was a financial news bulletin that was faxed out during the weekend before 9/11, alerting the readers to buy put options in. I'm not sure where. I think it was American Airlines, but it might be United Airlines. And so they claimed that there was no way that particular newsletter had any connection with 9/11. I mean, with Al Qaeda, sorry, and that it was just being done as a normal sort of trading activity. But the problem is that there are lots of bulletins going out, and people don't need to follow the bulletins, so you have to find out if it's unusual by some type of statistical procedure. You can't just make a blanket statement like that. So we have a Professor Pardisman at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, who actually has the econometric background, which I do also, by the way, to make an analysis of the data, and he found out that basically with 99% probability, it was the people who engaged in put option trading before 9/11 had inside knowledge. That means they had knowledge that it was going to happen before it happened and took advantage of it.
And and then so there was only a minor mention, as you said, in the 9/11 Commission report, though. Like, they didn't explore that, as well as a whole plethora of other smoking guns or red flags about the official story and whatnot.
Oh yes, of course. Yeah, I'm referring to the stock market transactions. There was also several other companies that were impacted negatively by 9/11, which also had various forms of either put option trades and perhaps inside a selling of stock. But I was just talking about American Airlines and United Airlines. But there's two professors in Switzerland who have done analysis of a larger set of companies.
Mm-hmm. And what kind of industries did those reach into?
Well, they're insurance companies primarily.
Oh yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I saw something about like Marvin Bush, who also was the chair leading up into the months before the September 11 attacks. He was I think he served as chair or someone on a board for an insurance company that insured the World Trade Center site, which he was in charge of security for some time as well. So it's totally rife with these weird, monetary benefits for all these different elitist, characters and whatnot. Another thing on 9/11 that's considered one of the most prominent smoking guns of all is the World Trade Center 7 complex, or building that completely just fell into its own footprint. It wasn't hit by a plane, and it held the Secret Service offices in there, the FBI, CIA, Securities and Exchange Commission, and Giuliani's emergency bunker, which is just kind of silly. You're going to put the emergency bunker at the biggest terrorist target in town.
Right.
And so can you speak a little bit about the Securities and Exchange Commission offices and all the kinds of documents that would have been in that building about Wall Street investigations? And I think recently an article came out saying that FOIA requests were responded to, and it turns out that they say they have no record of all sorts of documents that were destroyed in that building.
Yeah, the big news about the Securities and Exchange Commission, and I know somebody who worked there or works there. I'm not sure they're still there, and basically confirms what I'm going to say now, that the Securities and Exchange Commission, when it was prosecuting various cases, it had its original files in the World Trade Center 7, but no backup copies anyplace else in the United States. So when the building went down, all the files were lost. So what happened is in cases like the Enron case, just huge numbers of cases, like 1,000 cases, 2,000 cases, just had to be closed because they didn't have anything on them anymore. They didn't have the evidence anymore.
So some of that was like
that was major.
That's like some of the WorldCom scandal documents that Martha Stewart was involved in insider trading stuff, Tyco, Enron, and all those kind of fun documents.
Yeah, I don't know the list of companies. It would be a huge list.
Yeah,
but sure.
So I mean, that's another basically means of revealing some motive behind these building demolitions.
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, I don't know if that was sort of like a convenience outcome or whether it was part of the plans. I mean, we would be speculating in that regard. But it surely is the case that World Trade Center. In fact, if you ask a lot of people if they even know that World Trade Center came down, they don't. The 7, that is. They don't even know it because they see 2 towers went down. They see that image going over and over and over again on TV. But there was this other building, 7, which went down at 5:20 in the afternoon without anybody paying a whole lot of attention to it, and yet it wasn't hit by a plane. So of all the buildings, it had the least explanation for anything other than a demolition, a pre-planned demolition.
have you heard anything about Amy Goodman, who's actually going to be on our campus April 11th in the Kate Buchanan room? That she was confronted by, and you might have heard of this guy, his name's Kevin Barnett. He was a professor at the University of Wisconsin, taught an Islam and religious studies class, and he was in the news on like O'Reilly and Sean and Hannity and Combs, excuse me, about how he believes that there was, that we were lied to as to what exactly happened on 9/11. But
right.
He confronted Amy Goodman because apparently she was present when there was a countdown to demolition of that building. And I think it's been, 8 years that it took, or maybe a little under 8 years, that is it NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, it took them that long, and they subcontracted Underwriters Laboratory, and Kevin Ryan was a whistleblower from them that said they were fixing the report to say that, thermodynamic expansion, that fires inside World Trade Center 7 caused the structural failure that conveniently looked like a controlled demolition, but it wasn't. That's just, it's absolutely bizarre.
Yeah, no, I think it's, I did notice that Amy Goodman's going to be there in a couple of days from now, and I'd encourage anybody who's a listener to ask her some pointed questions about coverage of 9/11, because she's in an ideal position to make some serious interviews about 9/11, but she hasn't really done that. Mm-hmm. And it's not really explicable.
Mm-hmm. I do know that, I think we talked about this too when you came here for your appearance after your presentation, that, was it Howard Zinn? I could probably find this online. Howard Zinn said that he doesn't care who committed 9/11. And even Noam Chomsky went so far as to say something like that. Yeah,
and Noam Chomsky actually said it earlier and said it more strongly. Howard Zinn is a rather different case, because he was actually one of the people who promoted David Ray Griffin's books, at least one of his books, which is, of course, dealing with 9/11. So it seems, for some reason or other, he's backed off from even encouraging people to be interested in the topic, and I don't understand that. He does great stuff otherwise, but there's a number of people on the so-called progressive left who somehow just are afraid of getting seriously into 9/11 and looking at it, scientifically, objectively, not dispassionately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even Chomsky said that the 9/11 truth movement pushes non-scientific evidence.
Right.
I don't know, economics is a social science, and there's a lot of math involved, and not only that, there's something called physics, and they even found thermite in some of the dust, or thermate. Was that also in your journal?
And it's also, there's recent peer-reviewed articles that are being published that there was explosive material in the dust that came out of the World Trade Centers. Mm-hmm. It's clear that there is demolitioning materials that can be used for demolitions that were in that dust, and the Standards of Technology, National Institute of Standards of Technology, didn't even look at it, didn't even examine the question. Mm-hmm. They're afraid of the question, or whatever, but they didn't do it.
Can you, for a second, go into, what's another one of the major points that pretty much just disintegrates the official government story outside the World Trade Center 7 and the stock trading and that kind of stuff, or the put options?
Yeah, I personally think that there's a series of things that one can use to question the 9/11 Commission report and the whole government interpretation. And I don't really think it's necessary to focus on any one of them, because some people come at it from one direction, some people come at it from another direction. But another thing that we can point out is that the first evidence that there was some kind of something going wrong with the plane, some kind of deviation of the flight paths, was around 8:20 in the morning of 9/11. And yet the planes were still flying around and getting and presumably being, at least they claim, being hijacked as late as 10 o'clock that same morning. So where is the American air defenses for an hour and 43 minutes?
Mm-hmm.
That's, I mean, some people find that the most disturbing piece of evidence. Mm-hmm. One of my friends, for example, has always been very disturbed by that. Because the military bases in the United States are on the ready to intercept, planes which are going in out of flight paths, and they are able to do this in 10 minutes. Even the very first plane could have been intercepted.
Yeah, let alone the other three.
Right, let alone the other three.
And there's rumors that there are even more. So.
Right, there are rumors. That's right.
Yeah.
By the way, I don't know if you noticed, but there was an interview just came out 3 days ago by a woman who claims that she doesn't want to give her name, but she claims that she was in the room witnessing the orders to shoot down United Airlines in '93, the one that went into Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and she said there was no talk of terrorists being involved either.
Right.
Yeah, that's pretty powerful stuff right there as well. Yeah, who knows who this woman is, and if she does come out with a name and whatnot. But I mean, I'd definitely be scared as hell if I held such information.
Right. But let me say something about these people coming out with that kind of statement. There was a woman who collected dust from her apartment right across from the World Trade Center and gave it to Stephen Jones, who did the analysis, part of the analysis, to show that there was explosive dust in the World Trade Center, explosive materials in the World Trade Center dust. Mm-hmm. And, like anybody, you wonder about the person who gave it to him. You kind of wonder, well, maybe it could have been whoever, But it so happened that when I was out in California in, I guess in September, I actually met the woman who gave him the material, and she's 100% convincing. I mean, I have no doubt that she's a totally honest person who just gave evidence that she had serendipitously collected right after 9/11, because her apartment looked over the World Trade Center.
And back to this Flight 93 story from the Pentagon, this eyewitness. One thing about the wreckage of Flight 93 is it was found over like an 8-mile radius. Like there was a 3-mile debris field and then like a 5-mile debris field. They were found 8 miles apart, and that's not even at all anywhere near in conjunction with or it meshes at all with normal planes that crash land. You don't fly apart in midair and debris doesn't fly for miles. You don't hit the ground and then half the plane bounces off the ground a few miles into the sky.
I mean, I witnessed that right here in Buffalo, New York, when we had this crash about a month and a half ago.
Yeah.
I mean, the plane, of course, just it was right there. The pieces were there. It wasn't disintegrated, while the plane in Pennsylvania actually disintegrated. They couldn't even see where the plane was. And yet they claimed that they identified almost all the passengers by DNA testing.
When the coroner said for Flight 93 that after 15 minutes, he said he didn't have a job to do. He said it was like the people got off the plane in midair or something like that.
Yeah.
Oh man, it's a lot of great evidence. Oh, and another thing about World Trade Center 7 too. You see the Beijing skyscraper. There was a very similarly built structure that roasted in a 5-alarm fire for hours and hours and hours, and the thing was completely gutted, but it never collapsed.
Yeah.
And I mean
and Madrid also, another building.
Yeah, another building in Madrid. The Beijing one's is definitely cherry on top though, because that one roasted more than any other building of a similar size and whatnot. Let's see. I was gonna try and pull up. Here's this little Chomsky piece. We'll bust a little soundbite out here. We'll see how this goes.
There's a big industry.
Oh, I gotta turn the levels up on this. Give me 1 second. Here we go.
There's a big industry in the United States, on the left as well. I mean, you see the email that I get. There's a huge internet industry from the left. trying to demonstrate that this was all fake and it was planned by the Bush administration and so on. If you look at the evidence, anybody who knows anything about the sciences would instantly discount that evidence.
There you go. There's Chomsky himself saying that the evidence is not scientific. I mean,
right,
that was shocking to me.
Yeah, it's totally shocking because he doesn't. It's as if the 9/11 Commission evidence is scientific. I mean, a lot of the 9/11 truth movement is precisely showing how unscientific and how basically just propaganda the 9/11 Commission report is. For example, one of my favorite topics is the alleged hijackers, because they claim that there's 19 hijackers, and yet right after 9/11 they had a list which was not the same list as you have now. It was a list of 15 names, the same as you have now, and 4 names that were changed when they found out that one of the people was actually already dead for a year. Anyway, they changed 4 names, and then there was reports afterwards in places like the LA Times, like Independent, like BBC, and a Saudi newspaper that 10 of the 19 alleged hijackers were raised, basically said, "Hey, I'm alive somewhere in the world. Why are you accusing me of being a hijacker?" And these people are not just a question of having the same name. They were identified by their schooling or by their work or by their location to be the hijackers. So it's not a case of mistaken identity. It's not a case of just transliteration of a name from Arabic or something like that. And the 9/11 Commission didn't even ask any questions about whether the identities of the 19 persons are correct or not. We don't even have a manifest even from the airlines which shows the names of the people. So that's, talking about being unscientific.
Yeah.
That would never get through any court of law. If you were trying to accuse any of those people in a criminal court, any decent defense lawyer would point out that kind of evidence.
Absolutely. Let's see. Oh, what was it? Oh, yeah. There's something else I was thinking about. Which aspect was it? I got like 20 thoughts going right now. It's really interesting too that Rumsfeld himself actually says that Flight 93 was shot down. Did you ever see that slip of the tongue that he made?
Yeah, right. And then, yes, that's right. There's also another strange thing, and that is that the families of the hijackers claimed, the alleged hijackers, I always say alleged, I try to always say alleged, the alleged hijackers, some of those families offered DNA evidence for their family member, and the government refused to get it. So they do all this work for the DNA evidence for the passengers, but they refuse to do it for any of the alleged hijackers. It's really incredible. But that's one of the first things you would want to do. Basically the whole world has been redirected by 9/11 based upon the fact that these 19 people, in conjunction with Osama bin Laden and maybe a few other people, undertook this massive terrorist operation. But suppose it was not done by that set of individuals, but by somebody quite different.
Well,
by the way, I don't think that Bush himself knew about it.
No.
I don't think he was a planner. I think he was used.
He was integral in being part of it, though, I would say. He's Skull and Bones, and those guys are pretty shady. In 2004, you had John Kerry, Skull and Bones 67, and Bush, class 69 at Yale, both from Skull and Bones, with a secret oath to each other that subverts any oath to, country or corporation or, that's their priority is each other. And it's a secret fraternal brotherhood, and they go back with roots that expand beyond our even regular comprehension of ancient history even. And that's a whole show right there. We could go into that. There was a lot of money that was made, though, off of these wars, and you spoke about in the beginning of the book, in the introduction, you gave 3 examples, the Manhattan Project and some other things as to how this could have been pulled off, because some people find it to be unbelievable that the government could have possibly been involved in something like this, or elements within it. So can you break those little aspects down again, just to kind of give the listeners a taste of, why it is believable, why it is palatable that the government could have been involved in this?
Yeah, I mean, I think some people have a natural tendency, and there's nothing wrong with that, to say, look, if this had been engineered by a group of, let's say, 24 people connected to the Bush administration, that's a legitimate presupposition about what happened in fact. If there were those people involved, wouldn't somebody have come forward by now and spilled the beans, at least to some extent? Actually, this woman who witnessed the shooting, or who witnessed the orders to shoot down UA-93, might be one of those people. But anyway, you're asking me about previous historical episodes. The Manhattan Project, for example, which developed the atomic bomb being used in the Japanese at the end of the Second World War. That project was done by thousands of people. I mean, I think even hundreds of thousands of people were involved. Most of them did not know what the ultimate purpose was. There was only, I don't know how large a list of people who knew what the ultimate purpose of the project was, but it was certainly not, almost all of them did not know.
It's a compartmentalization, right? Compartmentalization, everybody only knows as much as they have to.
And it was so compartmentalized that even the Vice President of the United States, Harry Truman, didn't know about it. He had to be told about it after he became president, when Roosevelt died. So that's one example. And another example is Operation Gladio, which, we don't have time to talk about it very much, but Operation Gladio was basically in Europe to try and put down, it was initially set up to put down any kind of communist invasion that might occur sort of shortly after World War II, but it quickly shifted over to terrorist activities done by the right-wing forces, but blamed on left-wing forces, principally, but not only in Italy. And nobody knew, and nobody could prove that until a prime minister in Italy finally acknowledged the fact that Operation Gladio did exist. And that took like 30 years before that came out. So that's the kind of, maybe even more than that. So
those were like assassinations.
Trying to accelerate the knowledge of what really was behind 9/11.
Yeah, and those were assassinations and false flag attacks and stuff like that. And then there was even the LaVon Affair. We didn't get into this because it's not really your area of expertise and it is kind of expansive, but the movie Fabled Enemies by Jason Burmis talks about the Israeli-Pakistani CIA intelligence connections that day. And there's something called the LaVon Affair, which was basically false flag terror attacks that were launched on like post offices and other things, and one of the agents got caught and then implicated the entire ring that was involved in this, but it was to keep a military presence in Egypt, I believe. That's another example of something like Operation Gladio, where they use this terror to enforce a foreign policy that's friendly, or it's a programming something that's friendly to their interests.
Yeah, one of the chapters in my book is by David McGregor, and the title of his chapter is precisely about Machiavellian state terrorism, which is basically everybody kind of knows who Machiavelli is, and a famous book called The Prince, and the Machiavellian state terrorist aspect is to use a terrorist event to promote the glorification of the existing state, the prince or whatever. And there's no reason to exempt the United States from doing that as well as any other country.
And then you go back, did you also mention the Lusitania and or maybe the Remember the Maine, Spanish-American War?
I didn't mention the Spanish-American War, but I did mention Lusitania. Lusitania is, again, a case where the blame was put 100% on the Germans, And yet and it is true, I mean, that there's no question that the Germans shot the torpedo that sent the Lusitania down, but the question is, why was the boat there in the first place? Okay, and what was on the boat? And were there violations of international law in what was on the boat? For example, it just came out recently that of actual evidence that there was a lot of rifle ammunition on the Lusitania that was supposed to be, not supposed to be there. It's supposed to be a commercial liner. They snuck war materials in the Lusitania, and the Germans knew about that. Okay, and furthermore, there wasn't any reason why the Lusitania should have been in a war zone in the first place.
And there wasn't there an article or advertisements in the New York Times warning people, and Alex Jones, I think, had this in one of his documentary films, like Terror Storm or something like that, where they warned people not to go on the ship and that it would likely be sunk.
Yes, that's correct.
And back to remember the Maine, that was William Randolph Hearst propaganda that he was very proud of. He even referred to the Spanish-American War as his war because they said like some coal or something exploded or whatnot was that the actual cause of this explosion, but they said that they were hit by a mine or something from the Spanish, and that as a result that we must go to war. But there was a whole bunch of propaganda from the Hearst newspapers, and they used the phrase "Remember the Maine," and that's pretty much how they got that to go. And that's historically relevant, and it's pretty clear cut. And also, there's the Gulf of Tonkin. Maybe you could elaborate on that one real quick before you get out of here.
Well, the Gulf of Tonkin, of course, was another episode that set up the United States' massive intervention in the Vietnam War by claiming that the American ship was shot at when it wasn't shot at. And it was quite well known. And there was actually, at that time, it was interesting, there was 2 U.S. senators that didn't believe the story from the get-go and voted against authorizing military intervention because of the Gulf of Tonkin incident. One was Wayne Morris, I think he was from Oregon, and the other one was Ernest Gruening from, I think, Alaska. I may have the states reversed, but those names always remember as shining senators in my list of outstanding U.S. senators.
Say those names again.
Oh.
Say those names again.
Hold on, you're echoing. Come over here and talk to me. Sorry, we got a DJ in the other booth, and I think he had some input.
What are those names again?
Oh, yeah.
The names again, Ernest Gruening, Greening, G, but it's not spelled like green. It's spelled like Gruen, Gruening, and Wayne Morris, Morris.
Okay.
Morse, sorry.
All right. Yeah, I'll try and look that up and get posted on the blog, because I have to put a playlist, and I usually put some kind of a summary as to what we talked about in each show. I'll try and get that out there. But yeah, the Gulf of Tonkin, even Robert S. McNamara was the Secretary of Defense, or the comparison, basically the Donald Rumsfeld of the Vietnam era, said that he was, in retrospect, he says it never happened. There was no attack on the ships in the Gulf of Tonkin, and they called the documentary, what was it, Fog of War, right?
Excuse me, I didn't hear you.
Fog of War was the documentary where Robert S. McNamara admits that the Gulf of Tonkin attacks never happened.
Yeah.
So that's something anybody out there can check out. Paul, do you have a website or anything you can drop before we get you out of here?
Well, I do, but it's the address for it is kind of complicated. But the easiest way is just do a search under my last name, Zarembka. Just a normal Google search, and you'll pick up the book without any difficulty.
All right, excellent.
And that's The Hidden History of 9/11.
All right. Well, it's been a pleasure having you on today. Hang on for 1 sec. I'm going to speak to you off air real quick before you go.
Okay.
But yeah, thanks everybody for listening.